An earthquake on a Richter scale of 7.6 intensity originated from a part of fault zone more than 200 kilometers long. 200 kilometers because originally it was thought it is 18 kilometers. Then it was extended to 20 kilometers. Then Baek extended it to about 70 kilometers. But before that, in 1987, before anybody had said anything, we had shown this fault to be about 200 kilometers long, right from the Balakot to the Indian Jammu area, and it joins with the fault there, and that is basically the Riasi. It is Balakot-Riasi fault. Okay, between Balakot and Riasi region, the fault joins Indus-Kohistan seismic zone. If we go to Kohistan, this fault actually joins what is known as Indus-Kohistan seismic zone, but in fact, it is a fault. What happens is that when geologists cannot place a fault because of vegetation, because the fault cuts the rocks, which are shales, where the faults creep, instead of breaking into the pulverized material, people say it has not daylighted. Actually, it has daylighted, but we are not capable of finding it. There are techniques to find it, and we can tell you what the techniques are, but this is just for your information. Okay, the rupture zone along KBT was about 70 kilometers in length. The area of impact is predominantly high relief with steep slopes, V-shaped valleys and gorges. As a consequence, this seismic activity, about 70,000 people died, while 750,000 people were displaced. Okay, most government buildings, including schools, collapsed, framework structures, wooden structures, and some buildings of NGOs built to withstand strong earthquakes in the area survived with minor damage. The wood structures 100 years ago in Kashmir were all wooden. They knew that the earthquakes will be there. They did not build pakka structures. They only built the wooden structures, and they were safe. Okay. Unavailability of helicopters in sufficient numbers, the absence of disaster management organization. Now we have one, which is called ERA. We did not have it. Okay. Unavailability of helicopters in sufficient numbers, the absence of lack of experience in rescue operations, and absence of locally available heavy machinery like lifts, cranes, bulldozers made the rescue impossible, resulting in very heavy losses. Physical changes, drying of springs, blocking of streams, erosion, and so on and so forth resulted. Lots of landslides were there, and huge destruction on the slopes of flora and fauna. Okay, so now this is introduction. I have already talked about it. You can see where the earthquake occurred. In the lower slide, you can see that this fault was extended to Bagh. But we had already named this slave. Punjab University had already named it as Balakot Riasi Fault, 200 kilometers. And later on, I was looking at an Indian publication just a couple of years ago. They're also showing the same fault now without referring to Punjab University. Good for them. Okay. Now, the areas which were most seriously affected were Balakot, Muzaffarabad, Bagh, and Gadi Habibullah, because this fault was regarded as between the Cambrian Dolomites, which are in Muzaffarabad, they call it Muzaffarabad Dolomites. Otherwise, in Mir Latif called them, the name given by him was Serban Dolomites, and the Murris on one side, but on the other side is the Dolomites. Now, the main fault damage lies in the dolomites because they were thick-bedded and brittle. When they broke, there was huge release of energy, whereas in murrays, because of shales, the movement was by creep and therefore less damage was done there. Okay. Now, rupture within molastic murray formation close to the city of Bagh was also, okay, just a minute. Most seriously affected area, Balakot, Muzaffarabad, Bagh, Gadi, Habibullah, rupture zone, which they could see was 80, but we could see it in murrays. It was much more going to India. Rupture within molastic murray formation close to the city of Bagh was clearly identified for the first time. Okay, now you look at it. The red that you can see is the fault that we marked way back in 1987, Munir Chaudhary and Zaka, and then you can see we have extended it towards Jammu. But then look at the left. What happened? When we went there, you can look at that diagram where there are aftershocks. Now, aftershocks show that the fault continued and there were earthquakes, some of them intensity 3, 4, even more. And a lot of damage was also done there. So this fault will continue and go up and be cut by Takot fault. This we already know, but it's not mentioned, not published yet. Okay, fine. Now I move to the next slide very quickly. Geology, the area most adversely affected by the earthquake, Hazara Kashmir syntaxis, lies within and close to the well-known syntaxis of Northwest Himalaya. Along this syntaxis, the 1500 kilometer long east-west Himalayan strike bend suddenly, making a hairpin bend, folding. Okay. It's okay. Let it be. Okay. Parts of this fault zone have been variously, ये मैंने आपको बता दिया है. Subsequently, two major active faults developed. Kashmir boundary thrust, we call it Kashmir boundary thrust, and it cuts MBT, it cuts Panjal fault. It is younger than Panjal, it is younger than MBT, and MBT is folded. Since MBT is folded, so syntaxis is younger than MBT, which means younger than Miocene, much younger than Miocene, and this fault cuts it right through. You have seen it. It's even younger, and the Jhelum fault is even younger, much younger features than we think. Okay, so a blind fault, they called it blind fault, Indus-Khoisan seismic zone, which I showed you, where the aftershocks were. So it's almost 300 kilometers. Now we come to this. The KBT is an upthrust structure which brings a Cambrian dolomite through Miocene Murray Formation, Molas, in Balakot, Gadi Habibullah, and Muzaffarabad. But please just attend to what I am going to say. Professor Naveed Hassan and myself, we went to this area very near Muzaffarabad. We mapped dolomites overlain by Kuldana, overlain by your Lockhart, overlain by Patala, overlain by Margala, all Paleocene, Eocene. No break between the Murrays and the Kuldanas. A continuous sequence, and we climbed many thousands of feet to check. And Naveed, of course, being a taller person, walked in front of me with bigger legs, and we were not able to see anything. Continuous sequence. So where is the fault? So you can ask, where is the fault? Here is Muzaffarabad, and there is a complete sequence. Please remember, never follow stratigraphic breaks. Follow the faults. So many mistakes have been made. People have followed the stratigraphic breaks. When there is no stratigraphic break, they say no fault. However, there is a fault, a very big fault, that is within dolomites over there. But when you move south or north, it is between the Dolomites and the Maris, and rest of the sequence is missing. Okay, fine. So this is something which you have to keep in your mind. And when the fault entered Maris, everybody said there is no fault. In Maris there were shales, lot of rainfall, lot of vegetation. So where is the fault? But we know the techniques, and we knew that the fault is there. That is why we marked the KBT. Okay. Then the seismically active intercoastal seismic zone is likely to connect KBT via Buri-Khel, Kattha. The intercoastal seismic zone, KBT together extend almost 300 kilometers. Okay. Now let me show you what happens. To the left, you can see forest on top, forest on bottom. In between the fault scrap, everything totally gone, finished. All flora, all fauna, all herpetofauna, all rabbits, all deer, everything was killed and buried. So much damage. And to your right, you also see the last figure. I think we can't show it here. Can we show it here? This one? Okay, that's next slide. That is next slide. Okay, now look here. How much is the displacement? You can see the down thrown block, 1 meter big, 1 meter down throw. And this is a supply. This is a supply. And you can see a big break in the road. And you can see in the background the Nisar camp, which I'll show you. And if we want to see this, then fracturing in rocks, the entire to the left, the entire area had slided down with big fractures. Well, anyway, now let's look at the next slide. Okay. Seismicity. Little information about microseismic activity. We are not monitoring our faults. All active faults must be monitored all the time. We are not doing it. And strangely, who is responsible for the seismic studies? The meteorology. People who have nothing to do with geology. But anyway, that's it. The October 8, 2005 earthquake occurred exactly 100 years after devastating Kangra earthquake, 77 on Richter scale in 1905. And I remember Dr. Naveed was there, I was there, Professor Bloch was there. We were looking at before 2005, rather in 2005, summer, we were there on a field work. And we said, 100 years are completing. We can't say anything. God forbid there is a big earthquake in our lives. Unfortunately, the same year, there's a big earthquake. Professor Ashraf wrote a letter to the university, remove this university from here. It will be destroyed. Nobody cared, and the university was totally destroyed. I'll show you the remnants. Okay. So, aftershocks occurred, 1200 aftershocks occurred. I have shown you the figure in the Khoistan. Okay, I'll move to the next slide, and that is, okay, now you can see what actually happened. Now, Dr. Usma worked with me in detail on remote sensing and GIS, and these diagrams you can see on the left, September 15, 2002, 3 years before the earthquake. You can see the river, you can see the slopes. To your left, to your right, you can see all area which was green, gone, white powder, dolomite crushed, totally. The river stopped, and look at the green. Damming of the river took place. Not only this, but you had a big slide all over. So this was one of the impacts that occurred. And this could be dangerous because if a big lake develops quickly and it breaks, people downstream will be harmed. Okay, now I come to this. Now, have a look at this. This is landslide mapping. On your left is November 14, 2000. Neelam River, and to your right is 27th October 2005. Look at the landslides. You can map them all. If you want, somebody can take a project, map all landslides which occurred in that area so that you can show where are the landslides, because later on there will be rain, there will be vegetation, people would not know this is a landslide. So anybody can do a project, no problem. And this too is the same thing. The stream is blocked. You can see the blocked stream, pooling of water because of landsliding. Okay, I move forward. Socioeconomic impacts. Now, before I think I can talk a little bit before I start socioeconomic impacts. Please remember, big mistakes have been made. If you don't know where the fault is, how are you going to take measures to protect people? A very strong German group in HDIP contested with me, Pastor Naveed and others, that there is no MBT south of Murray. Where is it? You can see total sequence, all Paleocene, Murray's. Where is the fault? They would take people there and ask, where is the fault? There is no fault, no MBT. And then we mapped the area with ETR people, Professor Berg, etc. And the fault was in Murray's. And it moves in Murray's up to Islamabad. Islamabad is safe because the main fault is in the Murray's. However, when supplies go into limestones, then earthquakes strike. They do. So that is the sort of situation. We must know where the fault is. One more thing, and then I'll move back to my topic and not digress. And that is Patton Fault. Huge earthquake occurred during Bhutto's time, known as Patton Fault. It is published in hundreds of papers. Patton Fault, Patton Fault, Patton Fault. Myself and Professor Naveed, we went there. We did not see any fault, and we said there's no fault. Then Professor Berg came. He said, I want to go to Patton Fault. I said there's no Patton Fault. He said, how can that be? The papers published. Okay, come on. And then he could not show us the Patton Fault. And he put one of his students, who is now in MIT, full professor, and he mapped the area. The fault was 25 kilometers to the north, and it was a strike slip fault. So that is the problem. You must know where the fault is, not just guess that there's a fault. Okay, right. Now I'll move back to this. In rural areas, the collapse of mud houses, the damage is done. The damage is done. In rural areas, the collapse of mud houses resulting in suffocation of inmates. This happened. Mud houses, they fell, and the dust entered them. Houses were closed. People were buried, and they died because of suffocation, not because of other reasons. In villages and towns, large number of houses with walls built using rounded to sub-rounded cobbles from nearby streams, terraces, and lean cement or mud paste collapsed like proverbial house of cards, killing or seriously injuring inmates in large numbers. Many these cobble, lean paste, mud paste walled houses had heavy reinforced concrete roofs, lantern डाले हुए थे ऊपर. When these fell, what happened? People were buried. They could not be rescued for many hours. They died because people had gone there to Middle East, made a lot of money. Instead of rebuilding the houses, they removed the kacha roofs and put thick lanterns. And when there was an earthquake, the walls, they moved out. They had to move out, and the lanterns fell on people. Lots of people died because of this. They could not be rescued because roads are blocked. Army could not move the cranes and the heavy machinery. That was the problem. Let me tell you, army suffered very heavy damage, but within hours the army recovered. Within hours, they did not care about their casualties. They were in the field helping people. We were surprised. Just within a few hours, the young soldiers, the young officers were in the field helping people immediately after dealing with their own problem. Okay. Now, high-level terraces slumped and slides on peripheries, resulting in collapse and tumbling of houses. People had built houses on steep slopes. All these slopes, they gave way and everybody was removed. So instead of talking, I'll just show you. That will be better for you. Now look at this. Look at the rupture zone. This is a huge rupture zone, and the forest there in the background is about 10,000 feet. All the animals there, they all died. Now you can see very clearly a house collapsed in front where the man is standing. It was a pakka house, cemented with boulders, with blocks. But look at the back. Look at the green arrow. The wood house, it survived. Nothing happened to this wood house. Okay. Then look at this one, the lower one. The houses which are built on a flatter area survived. The houses built on a slope, they all were collapsed. They were totally destroyed. All flora and fauna was totally destroyed. This makes the difference. Only geologists can guide where to put a house and where not to put a house. Nobody else can. Okay, then I move forward. And rescue. After the earthquake, rescue operations were carried out, but not very successful because rugged and landslide prone area. All roads were blocked. Bad weather, collapse of roads, paths, communication infrastructure, everything destroyed. Very few helicopters to take the supplies. Then some Chinook helicopters came from Afghanistan and German helicopters from Afghanistan, and they helped Pakistani helicopters. After that, we recommended to the government to have more helicopters in the area. They should be with the army, they should use it, but they should come to rescue if something happens. Okay, narrow valleys and the scale of destruction was large. Government organization structures in the area collapsed. All government building, मैं ये उर्दू में बात करूंगा क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट के पास पैसा नहीं होता, गरीब गवर्नमेंट है, बिल्डिंगें बनाते हैं ठेके पे, वो सारी collapse हो गई. वो लोग जिन्होंने लोगों को रेस्क्यू करना था, मैंने कहा वही मर गए, तो करते क्या? Then army had to intervene. This is what actually happened. So please remember, in these areas, government buildings must be very strong. They should not collapse so that they can come out and do something. Okay. Now, I will just show you something. This is something which is very tragic. You can see Balakot, 17th October 2003. Look at Balakot, 25,000 people living there. There are steep valleys. But what happened? The area near Balakot is very flat. People loved it. They built all their houses there. But what was it? It was a crush zone of the fault. It was a fault scrap where they built fault scrap. That is where they built Balakot. Then there was a moment, no house could survive, no matter how good the house, no matter how strong the house, no matter how much you invest, no house can stand. Because displacement was up to 5 meters, 4 meters, 3 meters. The Balakot bridge, total bridge, concrete bridge, one side moved full 1 meter like this, because you are on a crash zone. So you can see to the right, after the earthquake, nothing survived except one mosque. And that mosque survived. Anyway, it was well built, no doubt about it, but it survived. But anyway, you can see all vegetation gone, everything gone, all people killed. Why is Balakot long? Because it is a fault scrap. They built on a fault scrap, one after the other. Okay, now I can show you something even more tragic. Scores of people died here. Our geologists, our geology students, they died here. Why? Because of the earthquake, this is the building of the Institute of Geology. Building of the Institute of Geology. The geological bulletins were there, and the files where Dr. Shiv had written a letter that we should shift was also there. What a tragedy. They don't listen to us, did not listen to geologists. Now, rupture at one place on the back, the down-thrown block, 3 meter, it fell 3 meters. Okay, now I'll not do that. Okay, air pollution, aerosols, particulate matter emissions, air pollution was widespread in the area where muddy formation fluvials were exposed. Widespread respiratory diseases and suffocation events. Huge quantities of dust went up. In the landslides, so much dust went into the air that the people trapped in those dusty conditions, many of them simply suffocated. Now you look at this. You can see the two lanterns. This is what happened. People were buried. Why these houses fell? Because they were on a steep slope. Actually, they were on a landslide. And nobody cared about it. Now you look to the right. Houses are intact. They are many of them are properly built. They survived. But this area did not survive because it was on the land. Steep slope, and there was an active landslide. After rains, there were trees all over. Everything was going very well. Then earthquake triggered the landslide, and everything was destroyed totally. Nobody survived. Now, ecological disaster. Destruction of flora and fauna, especially herpetofauna, and not herpetofauna is not source of medicines actually. There were lots of medicinal plants. Even they were destroyed. Subtropical scrub type vegetation at lower altitudes and temperate Himalaya, mixed forests through subalpine scrub and alpine vegetation was heavily damaged along with rich herpetofauna. You have seen what happened at the fall scraps. Everything was finished totally. Okay. The tall pine-dominated forests prevail drying up of springs, temporary damming of streams, increase in erosion, especially gully erosion, and sedimentation impacts on the Magla Dam. It is said 200 million tons of material moved down into the Magla Dam. That is what happened after the earthquake. Okay, now the animals which are affected were snow leopard, Himalayan coral, musk deer. Musk deer is very little. There were the rabbits, there were the foxes, the red foxes, and the brown foxes, grey foxes, and the wild goats, etc. In this scrap zones, they were all killed. Bears, they were all affected negatively. Okay, now damage to ecosystem services. People depend on these forests and these areas for their survival. Over 25 kilometers at least, all these things were removed. Their living was very badly affected. They could not go there, could not get wood, could not collect the medicinal herbs to sell, and etc. The water, the springs went dry, and so on and so forth. Okay, then because of this, people suffered heavily economically and socially. The wild fruits they collected could not collect anymore. And that was the problem. Across the region, people rely directly on ecological services for their livelihood and sustenance. Such mountain landscapes are highly vulnerable to changes in the ecosystem. The medicinal plants are important source of income in the area that are destroyed during the earthquake. So medicinal plants they could not collect and sell. Local mushrooms were in plenty, no more in these areas. Local communities' perceptions are that the natural hazards are impacting the prevailing ecosystem services in a negative way. This relates to the already established literature that the natural hazards, earthquakes, are impacting the agriculture and water resources. Water was diverted, springs became dry, their water courses broke down, so agriculture was affected negatively. Okay, mitigation. This stage was remarkable success. due to you, oh sorry, I think this is mixed, so I will not go by this. I will just tell you. During the mitigation stage, there was no provision. People suffered badly. They could not be rescued. They could not be given immediately the aid they needed. After the earthquake, there was hardly any crime like stealing or looting. Government of Pakistan moved quickly and within a couple of weeks opened most roads. Most important, no stealing, no crime. Elsewhere in the world, wherever there's a natural disaster, there is a lot of crime and looting. Not a single case of looting, etc. That was excellent. Okay. In the second stage, in the first case, Pakistan government and international community provided tents, medicines, doctors, food, hospitals, and temporary tent schools. In the second stage, prefabricated structures were provided and rehabilitation was carried out. They spent $5 billion on rehabilitation. Temporary structures were built, followed by other structures that I'll move so that I know I may not have much time. Recommendation: an independent federal institute of seismotectonics studies should be established. Number two, the institute, along with other related organizations dealing with seismotectonics, should monitor all capable and active faults and pass close to the cities, towns, and population clusters. In view of 8 October 2005 earthquake, new and defined seismic zonation and corresponding building codes should be put in place. They have been, but they're not as good as they should be. All government proposed disaster relief cells units in calamity-prone areas must be housed in very strong buildings. कोनो जल्जला आए तो वही मर जाए जिन्होंने relief provide करना है. Construction should not be allowed on or close to rupture zones, fault supplies, landslide prone area. They should be prohibited to build anything there. Now, in the end, I will say before references, can I take just 5 more minutes? Okay. Now, I will talk to you about some of the geological matters which are important. And as I told you already, that if we say that we have mapped the faults properly, many faults were not mapped properly. Patton fault example I've given you. There are 10 criteria which you can use to identify a fault, and you could not apply those to Patton. Similarly, MBT, as I've already said, the German group opposed. He said there's no MBT, there's no break. And then myself and Dr. Professor Munib Naveed Hassan, while working on the sedimentology, could clearly see complete sequence, but fault moving into Murray. We could see that. And then Professor Berg, ETR team and our teams mapped it in Murray. It's a big fault. And if you go along there, you can see recumbent fold, breaking of sandstones and so on. So fault should be mapped properly. There's another technique of mapping the faults. Do not map the fault directly. Do not do it. Move away, look at 3 sets of joints and measure striations, and you'll find out what the fault is. How does it look like? What is the attitude? What is the depth? You can do that easily. The technique is available. So that can be applied. Then about syntaxes. I just want to say a few things. You may not like it, what I'm going to say, because you read about syntaxes. Now this syntax is, Western Himalayan syntax is a dome. It's a dome, but the younger rocks are in the core and the older rocks are on the outside. It is not an anticline, it should be called antiform. Never call it anticline, because it is the reverse of what it should be. You know very well, in an anticline, the older rocks are in the core and younger on, but it is the other way around. The younger rocks are in the middle and older on the outside. Now there are 2 ways of thinking about it. We always say there's a Nimchi Barwa syntaxes and Western Himalayan syntaxes. Look at the Western Himalayan syntaxes. What has happened? rocks go like this, come back and move normally. It was said that it was because of the collision of India with Asia, and that at the place of syntaxis, Indian part was protruding, and therefore it hit and syntaxis developed. But when did that happen? In Eocene? But the syntaxis is much younger because it folds your MBT. It has to be younger than MBT. And therefore, how can that happen? The only explanation is, which has been given by many geologists, which also includes us, ETR, and so on, that there was in this area, because of certain reasons, there was a series of naps, one nap, second nap, third nap, fourth nap, stratigraphy reversed, and then there was a fault. There is not one syntaxis. What about Nanga Parbat syntaxis? I can just show you Nanga Parbat very quickly. And what about Nanga Parbat syntaxis? In Nanga Parbat, the syntaxis is much bigger. It is not called Western Himalayan syntaxis, although it's bigger than. It is bigger than. Now you can have a look at just 1 minute. That one. No, it's the next slide. Now look at it. The Nanga Parbat syntax is much bigger than your Western Himalayan syntaxis. The Bishan syntaxis, what about Bishan syntaxis? It's the basement which has come out. Nanga Parbat basement which has come out. So to say that the Indian shield was irregular, it hit and produced syntaxis needs some rethink. It needs rethinking. Think about it. Whether whatever the authorities say is right or not right. There I can count 12 syntaxes along the Himalayas. Everywhere. Thrusting, naps, and refolding. This is what has happened. Why that happened is something that we have to look at. So don't believe in this. Because if it was related with Indian shield, it is written in many books everywhere. Then it should be Eocene in age, 50 million years. But it folds around much younger faults. So how can you justify it? So the point I am trying to make is very simple, that this fault which moves from Jammu, Riasi to Balakot to Kohistan is cut by the Thakot fault. The Bishan syntaxis has two faults. One, Puran Chakesar on Swat side and another on the Thakot side. And the area which comes out is Precambrian. Rocks are as old as 1800 million years old. This is a window. It's a tectonic window. So lots of areas where you can carry out your future research. There are hundreds of problems and you don't have people to tackle them all. Normally it appears everything is solved. Everything is resolved. What is it that we are going to do? That's not correct. And this institute is the best place to understand that. They will tell you about the problems. You'll try to solve the problems and get credit for solving the problems. So these are the points I'm going to make. I'm not now going to do anything else because I don't want to say things which other speakers are going to say about tectonics. However, I can give you a lecture later on the tectonics as well after this seminar and tell you what tectonics looks like, what you read and what is the reality on ground. And believe me, the difference has been made by this institute. It has made many discoveries, many discoveries, but we don't acknowledge. So that is the sort of situation. And with these words, if you want to ask me any question, you're welcome.